Well, Tom Steyer, welcome back to the Climate Pod.
Well, Ty and Brock, it is really a pleasure to see you guys again.
It's fantastic to see you again as well. And, it was announced earlier this month that you are named chairman of Vice President Biden's Climate Engagement Advisory Council. What made you want to take on this position?
Well, I've been working with the Biden campaign virtually since I stopped running for president at the end of February. And I feel as if the stark difference on energy, environmental justice, climate between Vice President Biden and Mr. Trump is so stark and so vast, as it is on so many other issues.
Sure.
That I felt that, I'm working on a number of things, but one of the things that I consider the most important, maybe the most important thing, is to make sure that we have a president who's going to deal honestly and knowledgeably and passionately with our needs to, turn the page in terms of environmental justice, in terms of creating clean energy jobs for working families, for union members, and to really get us back on a path to sustainability and to address the climate crisis that is existing even in a time of COVID. There's something else going on that can swamp us. And so we need a president who can put those issues together into a meaningful way. I think Joe Biden is the person. He's the moment has found the person, and he's the person. And so my goal in this is to both help him. He came out with a great climate plan on Tuesday, but it's also to get his message out and help him get his message out to as many people across the country as possible. Because when they hear it, for people who care about those issues, environmental justice, clean energy jobs, climate, he really is putting forward something powerful. It's a priority for him. And when people hear that, they really do respond.
Sure. Well, what's the purpose of this council?
Well, it includes people from the environmental justice community. It includes some traditional environmentalists. And it also includes the head of the largest energy union in the country, which is the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the IBEW. And so the idea is to come up with a program to reach out to people at the grassroots, to engage them on the Biden plan, Joe Biden's, advocacy and passion on this issue, and to engage people both to get them to vote, but also to rally people around the idea that come 2021, we're going to do something really significant together, that it's going to make a dramatic difference for our future. And we've got to start understanding what that looks like and start pushing for it as hard as we can.
Well, how important voter registration is and getting people out to vote, right? And in 2016, only 43% of eligible voters under the age of 30 actually voted, where 71% of voters over the age of 60 came out to vote. So how important is a strong stance on combating the climate crisis to driving greater voter turnout, especially amongst younger people?
Well, Ty, you and I both know it's absolutely critical. And I think you guys know that I started NextGen America, which is the largest youth voter registration, engagement, and turnout organization in the United States, and really in American history. And I know that when your generation shows up and when you guys take the power that's really in your hands, you are going to take over this country and save the world. And that's, when you ask how important is climate to that, it's not the only issue, but it is one of the top two issues.
Sure.
And, we see this. NextGen has asked millions of people under the age of 35. We organize 18 to 35. And we ask, what are the top issues? And the issues have been consistent across the country for a long time. They're healthcare, cost of college, racial justice, always, regardless of where we are, and climate. and sometimes it's gun violence.
Mhm.
But we see that consistently. And we also have seen the really dramatic lower level of voter participation of people in that age group. I know that the reason you're using up to 30 ties because that's what they can give, you can get out of the voter file. So that's what they report officially. That's the only real official numbers we can use is by decade, doesn't go to 35. And I also know that people between 18 and 35, which includes millennials and Gen Z, biggest age cohort in America, bigger than the boomers, most diverse age cohort in American history, most progressive age cohort by far in the United States. And when you guys show up and take the power, then we're going to have a different outcome everywhere in the United States of America. And which is why I started NextGen, is to say, let's make sure we actually have a representative democracy. Let's make sure that the people's voices get counted fairly across racial, lines, across ethnicity, and across age, because it's really important for this country that we have the broadest democracy, which specifically includes heavy youth participation. I mean, 18 to 35 to me is youth. To you, it may be youth into deep middle age, but
I'm still hanging on. So it's still youth to me, barely, at least for the next month and a half. But through NextGen, I mean, what did you learn, or what have you learned that you're bringing to the council to help, build the strategy to motivate those younger voters, especially those that care about climate change, to get out and vote?
Well, there's a bunch of pretty simple lessons. The first one is this: the vice president is really good on this issue. I've been doing voter outreach for the campaign, doing surrogate speaking for the campaign. The vice president is really good on this issue. If you look at the, policy platform he put out last Tuesday, it is really strong. But beyond that, this is something that I know from talking to him, he takes really seriously, that he prioritizes, and that he connects very deeply with job creation, working families, unionization, and environmental justice. And he really does, he's someone who relates to issues through people and through, caring about people. And this is an issue that he really relates to. So what I've learned from NextGen is, first of all, not everybody knows how good he is on this issue in terms of both policy and caring and prioritization. I know that for people under 35, they know what's going on. They're educated. They care. The biggest block to heavy voter participation by young voters is, do they even believe the system works?
Yeah.
That's what we hear millions of times is, this is what I care about. I'm passionate about it. I just think this system stinks, and I don't believe my vote matters, and therefore I'm not going to participate. And our whole goal is, okay, that's the start of a conversation, because when you as a group turn out, your vote matters an enormous amount. And when you as a group show up, you really can change the course of American and world history. And this is the year.
Yeah.
It's like, for people who care about climate, I mean, the UN has always been, in my mind, too optimistic about the path we're on. They've said we're on a better path in climate and a slower deterioration of the natural world than I think is true. And they've said we have 9 years, literally 9 years from Inauguration Day, to basically solve the climate problem. We can't afford 4 more years out of 9 years.
Right.
Cannot afford it. It's like the math is simple. We can't do it. So to me, these next 3.5 months between now and November 3rd, for everybody, I mean, you guys are clearly doing your part, but for every person, every American citizen, this is the chance to show up. This is the responsibility to show up. And I'm not shy about saying it.
Yeah.
I mean, we really have to do it together. There is no other way to do it. And people are, it's like, there's no excuse for not showing up at this point, because everybody's future is on the line together.
Well, let's talk about an example of people showing up to get something great done, which is this is 10 years ago. This is the 10th anniversary of you helping to lead a coalition to oppose Prop 23 in California, which would have devastated legislation that California lawmakers had passed to combat the climate crisis. What did you learn from that state level experience that you can be that could be applicable to this election cycle?
You know, the funny thing, Brock, is it's completely applicable because that was a political fight going out and talking to voters in California about how they relate to clean energy, how they relate to clean air and clean water, and how they relate to clean energy job creation. And the funny thing is, I mean, I think people around the country sometimes thinks that citizens of California are different from other Americans. And let me assure you, they are not.
And it's pretty representative, right? Population wise.
Very
right.
And we also happen to be we're a majority minority state.
Yeah.
So when we did this, we changed the way that people talked about energy, climate, environmental justice. First of all, we started with a different coalition. We said, we knew that in California and across the United States, the people who care the most about every one of those issues, environmentalism, environmental justice, climate, are Latinos. The number 2 group, African Americans. The number 3 group, Asian Americans. So from the very beginning, we were saying, our coalition has to be broad-based. We need leadership in terms of policy and politics from those communities. If we don't have it, we're not going to win. And secondly, we said, and this is less true now, but in those days it was really true, but this is before the big fires, before a lot of, the obvious evidence of, the impact of climate on human beings. We said, look, nobody in California is related to a polar bear. Polar bears are not voting issues for Californians. So we're going to talk about the issues that affect voters, their families, and their communities. So we talked a lot about clean air and clean water. And our best ad, we had a killer ad, which was a woman in her mid-50s in a garden who was the head of the California part of the American Lung Association, talking about air pollution and how if we get rid of our clean energy laws, we're going to have more asthma. And everybody in California was like, of course that's true. And of course she's telling the truth. It wasn't an actor. It was a woman who devoted her life to this issue, and everybody knew it, and she did a great job. And so we talked about clean air, particularly in Black and brown communities. We talked about clean water, and we talked about we're going to create hundreds of thousands of jobs. We're going to do it in California. We're going to do it across California, and particularly in low-income communities and communities of color. And people were basically, there were a lot of things that went right for us in that campaign. No one thought we'd win, and we ended up getting 70% of the vote. But we broke the mold on what we talked about because we also said, look, most of the people in California did not like 11th grade science class. And you think that you can take them back to 11th grade science class and say, sit down, keep your mouth shut, and listen to me because I know a lot of stuff you don't know. They didn't want to hear it. What they wanted to hear is, why does this make sense for me and my family? And it really, 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 really did. And by the time it was over, the head of one of the oil companies who was trying to repeal our clean energy laws said to a friend of mine, I had no idea that Tom Steyer was so mean. It was like, mean. Come on, you guys.
Well, this Biden plan, as you mentioned, how impressed you are with it. It has bold policy proposals in clean energy and a focus on environmental justice. This policy matters to people. How do you think the reception to these policy proposals will help drive more voters out to vote?
Well, Brock, I think that this platform appeals broadly, but I think it specifically addresses some of the political shortcomings of previous climate proposals. So for instance, having the support of the IBEW, having union support for this infrastructure program is huge. And I think they trust Vice President Biden, and they should, because he really, really has their interests right up in front of his face all the time. He really cares about it. And so having that as people who are supporting this plan is incredibly significant, and I think is a testimony to how good this plan is. Secondly, this will be the first time. Look, when we were talking about environmental justice in 2010, it wasn't the first time in California, but that was something that people did not talk about. What we've seen in California is that our progressive energy laws have been pushed through by representatives from the poorest zip codes in our state, overwhelmingly legislators of color. And so the fact that this plan that the vice president put out puts environmental justice at, right up front and includes those communities being at the table in figuring out what the policies are going to be and then pushing them through is also, in my mind, a huge issue politically, to get people involved and to reach out and to let them know, look, if your kid has asthma and can't go to school, if your kid has asthma and can't go out and play and lead a normal life, that's a voting issue. We have 1 million Californians who can't drink the water because it's unsafe. We have a lot of Flint, Michigans in California. There are a lot of Flint, Michigans across the United States of America, and this plan directly addresses that. So I think it specifically reaches out to young people, to communities of color, to labor households, and then broadly speaking, it speaks to everybody who knows that we're in a jam, and that actually this is going to be something that's an economic win for us, it's an employment win for us, it's a health win for us, it's a racial justice win for us. And oh yeah, by the way, we may actually save the planet and save ourselves while we do it.
Right.
So I don't see the other side of this argument is the real issue. It's like,
well, I don't know that we can
someone
provide
to
it.
come out and explain why that's not true.
Wrong podcast.
Well, you've debated the vice president on these issues. Have you seen the vice president evolve in any way when it comes to combating the climate crisis since he first entered the primary race last year?
Well, look, I would say this plan is definitely a real sharpening of his pencil in terms of policy. And I think that it's involved, he's very experienced in this. He really does care and prioritize this. I was impressed during the campaign talking to him backstage at some of those debates. It was kind of like, wow, this guy really knows his stuff. And I think this plan is definitely, if you look at it, he's talking about spending $2 trillion in the first 4 years. That's new. He's talking about 100% clean electricity generation by 2035. You guys know that's aggressive. This is an aggressive plan. And I think some of those details, which are not really details, those are big deals, are new. And so it does represent a step forward. I will say this too. The technology has moved faster than anyone would have expected or hoped. And so the ability to say that we'll have 100% clean electricity generation by 2035, or the goals for electric vehicles, or all of those things, they're possible in a way that people didn't think they were going to be possible.
Right.
The tech is really moving. Human ingenuity is better than burning rocks. We got to make that basic point to people.
And a huge part of the reason we've accelerated so fast on clean energy is because of the 2009 Recovery Act. It included $90 billion, right, in clean energy investment. And so it's cool to know that, we're taking a dramatic step up from even that, which was landmark at its time.
Look, it's so funny because you hear the Trump administration say, we're doing pretty well in terms of, our climate goals. And it's kind of like, really? Because you've done everything you can to frustrate them. You have appointed, the most retrograde people to positions of power about environmental protection and energy. You've done everything you can to stop progress. People have kept working at the state level and the municipal level. People have continued to recognize the problem and to prioritize it. And even though you're fighting them at every step of the way, you're trying to take credit for their work. It's kind of like, really?
So as you mentioned, we're building a big tent for these policy proposals. And there's obviously been the critique of whether it's Biden's plan or the House Democratic plan, and even the recommendations that had come out of the Bernie Biden committee, the advisory committee, that there's this huge investment in clean energy, but we haven't put forth a clear transition off of fossil fuels. Do you think Democrats are going to need to address that specifically in order to motivate more climate voters?
I don't know. That's a great question, because you're right. There's a plan. It doesn't answer some questions that may not be answerable, to be honest, Brock. So for instance, obviously the US has to get it right, but we're only 15% of the greenhouse gas emissions. So there also has to be a plan for us to work with and lead in the rest of the world, so that in fact, as a planet, and as a globe and a community of nations, we move to solve this problem. So there's going to be a lot of pressure, really starting the day after the election, knock on wood, for us to be working with other nations and getting ready for the UN COP in November of 2021 in Glasgow, Scotland. That's one thing. As you point out, there's going to be a real question about, does there have to be a direct fossil fuel, a program directly related to fossil fuels, as opposed to the rebuilding and the rules? We have something like that in California, but it's unclear to me if that's necessary, but I know there are people who think it absolutely is necessary. That's unclear to me, because I think the first order of business is this, the policies that were put out on Tuesday, which I think are extraordinarily positive and a huge step forward by the campaign. I think it's just great.
So
go ahead. No, please, Brock, go ahead.
No, we spent a lot of time talking about the presidential race, and you've also been involved in down ballot races, promoting candidates who support climate policies. How has your experience been like working with candidates at the more local levels?
Well, you're right. We have tried, and I have personally tried in a number of ways, to support climate champions. With the League of Conservation Voters and the Natural Resources Defense Council, we've set up something called GiveGreen, which highlights climate champions in important races across the country. I mean, US Senate races, US congressional races, but also at the state levels. So that if you're a climate donor and a climate voter, and you think it's critical, that something happened in Michigan, but you're not from Michigan, you can go to the GiveGreen website and see who the climate champions are in the State House and donate through GiveGreen. So not only do you give the money to the right person, but they know why you're giving it. And so that's something that has just exploded over the last 5 years, and that we feel really strongly that we want them to win, but we want them to know that part of the reason they won is the climate community supported them, and that's a big push for them to come out on the right end. So that's something we're doing. But also, at NextGen, if you register and engage voters, hopefully, and it's true, I think this is overwhelmingly true, they're voting from dog catcher to president. And so we want them to vote from dog catcher to president. We want it. Swing states for the presidency tend to be swing states for the Senate, tend to be swing states for the Congress, tend to be swing states, in terms of state legislatures and state senates. So, there's a huge overlap in terms of flipping the Senate, increasing our gains in the House, but also, as you guys know, this is a census year. In a sense, after a census year, you do redistricting at the congressional level and at the state legislature level. At the congressional level, the analysis that came out, I think a month ago, said Republicans gerrymandering has given them 27 extra congressional seats.
Yep.
That's out of 435 seats. 27 extra.
Yeah.
So that's an amazing, if that flipped, if that were to change so that the gerrymandering went away, that would be an additional 54 seat lead for Democrats, 2 times 27. So this is a huge year. I mean, for climate, this is a do or die year. It's absolutely a do or die year. But I think for our democracy, for racial justice, for our economy, and for a national response to COVID, this is a critical year. So, I know what I'm doing for the next 3.5 months. I'll put it that.
Us too. Because we know that because we saw that in 2010, just how impactful 2010 was for gerrymandering. But I don't want to get off on that tangent. Are there specific keys that you've seen that are going to help climate concerned candidates win at a local level? Any insight you've gained from that?
Rock, I think this is so simple. I think that what I'm going to say, I've been saying this following thing for years and people haven't believed me, but I really still believe it stronger than ever. It's turnout. This is a turnout election. No one in America hasn't decided how they're going to vote, but tens of millions of people hasn't decided really whether to vote. If we get high, I think the way we're going to know this is the generational election, the turn the page election, is going to be turnout.
Yeah.
And if we show up in historic numbers, then this is 1932 and FDR. This is 1860. This is the, we can't keep doing this anymore election. And it's really up to, more than anything else, it's up to your numerous, diverse, progressive generation to say, no, this is a historical change forever. We can't keep doing this. This is our chance. That's where we are. So to me, the simple question for every climate, warrior champion, for every progressive candidate is turnout.
Yeah.
Because if a lot of people turn out, and obviously there's going to be an organized, concerted attempt to subvert American democracy and take away the right of American citizens to vote. It's definitely happening. It's definitely going to continue to happen. But if we can make it to the polls, if we can vote by mail, if we show up in historic numbers, it's going to sweep everything. That's going to be the thing. Because look, I've been doing this for a long time. I'm not sure I've convinced one person to change their mind. Hopefully there's some people who hadn't made up their mind, but I know that NextGen has convinced millions of people to actually vote who otherwise wouldn't have. And that to me is going to be the measure. Not persuasion, not, somebody who really hasn't decided whether Donald Trump is an effective, honest, and well-meaning president. People, you guys know from your friends, most people have an opinion on that.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, from our Facebook pages, we definitely know, but
I'm sure you do.
Well, we know as you mentioned, environmental justice is going to play a huge role in this election for climate concerned voters. It always has, but I think with the protests around racial justice has even accelerated interest in making sure environmental justice is front and center in climate plans, and that was why we were excited to see that included in Biden's plans. How do you think that will drive voter interest and voter turnout this election cycle?
Well, I think, I wasn't kidding. I know Joe Biden's been in office for a long time. And I think that makes people in Washington, D.C. think that voters around the country definitely know who he is and what he stands for. And I don't think that's true. And so I look at his positions on environmental justice and climate as something that a lot of people don't know. They don't know how good he is. So to me, this is a way for him to reach people and show who he is, as well as his policies, to show that actually he's a very motivated person by compassion, that he is a healer and a caring person, that he's an optimist, and that he relates and cares about American citizens and can unify us. And it really does feel like that's the moment we're in. That's what people are looking for. And they need to know that not just that he cares about Americans, but he cares about them. And he does. And that's why I think environmental justice, you're talking about health. You're talking about kids and sick people. And those are things that that really motivate him. So I think this is an issue for young people, for people of color, where you can really say, wow, there's something here that's profound, that's profoundly different. And this is kind of something that I think will be new and powerful and can really drive the turnout that I think is going to be critical.
We saw Jamal Bowman win his primary in New York by focusing heavily on climate issues, but we also saw Charles Booker in Kentucky and Andrew Romanoff in Colorado actually lose their primary battles. So it suggests there is a varying levels of support or maybe interest in strong climate policies. So one, do you think that's true at state by state, and two, how do you approach voters in some of those states with maybe lower interest in climate change? How do you get them motivated to get out to vote?
Well, every one of those, every race is different. Kentucky, Colorado, really different places, really different candidates. So let me just talk about one of the ones that we were a little bit involved in, which was Charles Booker. He is a very good climate champion. He is somebody who came out of nowhere. No one thought that Charles Booker was going to be a serious contender for the Democratic candidacy. So he really came out of nowhere. And, I did not see that as, if you think about where he came from, how close he came, how short the time period was when people were taking him seriously, and the trajectory that he was on. It's funny, I didn't think of that as a failure at all. We thought of him as a really strong candidate and supported him and endorsed him. And, I did not see that as anything but, this is Kentucky, and he did incredibly well in my mind. Mm-hmm. So, no, I think this is going to be, to me, Ty, climate and racial justice and economic justice, all of these issues to me are one big issue. And they really are tied together. I think they're tied together in the plan that the vice president put out on Tuesday, but I think they're tied together for progressives across this country. And so, I don't think you can separate them. I think they're a really powerful motivator. I think and I do feel as if this is a transformational election. It's hopefully going to have a transformational impact on our country and our democracy. And let me say this. I think we're going to win. I think we're going to have a sweeping victory across the board. But if we don't, that's going to be transformational too.
Yeah.
So this is, I say it as, we've pushed all the chips right in the middle of the table. We have one hand to play. It's November 3rd, and it's kind of, we're all in. And we have to be in terms of where we stand on the climate, but I think we have to be in terms of where we stand on racial justice and democracy and economic justice. It's kind of, we have a very stark choice. I think we have a very strong candidate, and we have to, have a transformational win across the board to say, what, enough is enough. We have to do something dramatically different and dramatically better that represents your generation and represents, in my mind, the vast majority of American voters, including some who are going to vote against us.
Well, when we last spoke in May, we talked about how difficult it was to get voters to register, right? With COVID-19 pandemic. Yeah. And unbelievably, or maybe believably, this country is in a much worse position now than we were 2 months ago. So what are you doing, or maybe what can we do between now and November to promote safer voting so that we can get the turnout that you are talking about that we so greatly need?
Well, first of all, the number one thing that I think is going to make a difference is where there's vote by mail. Mm-hmm. Having ubiquitous vote by mail is going to enable the broadest and most representative democracy. So that's supporting that in any way you can has got to be number one. I think number two, I think everybody's got to wear masks. It's kind of, if you look around, the simplest thing we can do is actually take care of each other, and putting on a mask to protect other people from a virus that you could potentially be carrying, and for them to do the same for you, is the thing that can drive this, virus down to levels where it no longer pervades all of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
We have 3.5 months to go.
Right.
Do I think we're going to, you were saying in May, 2 months ago, we were in a very different position. Well, I can guarantee we're going to be a very different position 3.5 months from now. And I don't know what that position will be.
Sure.
I just know, we're in such a volatile health place, such a volatile economic place, such a volatile political place, that I'm sure over the next 3.5 months, there will be dramatic changes in where we are. And I think the things we can do to promote the broadest possible turnout, or anything we can do on that has got to be worth it, because that's going to be the measure of our success. I really believe it.
Well, it sounds like you're pretty optimistic about the election itself. I mean, how are you feeling 3.5 months from the election?
Well, Brock, no one could have been more wrong in 2016 than I was. I mean, we were in California. In California, NextGen registered over 800,000 people. And we had an amazing night in the state in November of 2016. And we had an amazingly bad night in the United States of America. And I really, really, really never expected this president to be elected. So I do feel as if all of the sort of facts are lining up on our side, but I am also very, very, very aware of how wrong I was in 2016. And so, when you run a race, they'll always tell you, you don't run to the tape, you run through the tape. And this is a desperate time in terms of the need for us to make a change. So I intend to run through that tape as fast as I can and leave, John Wooden was like, you practice as hard as you can practice. You compete as hard as you can compete. You leave no stone unturned, and you have no regrets when it's over. And, I'm a big John Wooden fan. And so, you know what? That's what he said. That's what he did. That's how his teams performed. And that's what I intend to do for the next 3.5 months.
John Wooden, who was born in the hometown of these two podcasters. Nice, John
right?
Wooden.
Yes. We
I
are
love
huge
him.
John Wooden fans.
He's the best coach in American history.
Yeah.
He's from Indiana.
He's from Indiana.
Well, and he was a basketball, there's a famous story about John Wooden. So he was the best high school basketball player in Indiana. And his junior year, they're in the finals. They're up by 1. There's like 5 seconds to go. The guy on the other team throws it, heaves one in from the opposite free throw line, and they lose by 1. And everybody on Wooden's team cries. The coaches cry. Every player cries except Wooden. And he's the best player, and it cost him the most. And they go, well, why aren't you crying? He goes, I played as hard as I could. I practiced as hard as I could. I did everything I could. The guy threw one in from 75 feet, okay? There's nothing I can do about that. And that's my attitude. We are going to win this, and we are going to practice as hard as we can and leave everything on the field. And that's what we can control. And that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, we're going to win this. We're not letting the president throw one in from 75 feet away. So.
No, right? No, but it really is a Wooden attitude.
Yeah.
Of that, you control what you can control. You give it absolutely everything. And you don't worry about it, because that's what you do what you can do. And that gives you peace of mind, and it lets you play better. You don't worry about the stuff you can't control.
I love going out on a John Wooden quote. Tom Steyer, always great to see you and talk to you. Thank you again for joining the Climate Pod.
You guys, it's such a pleasure to see you. It really is.